Dr. Pamela Lillian Isley. Most of you probably do not recognize this name. However, all of you should recognize her alter ego, Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is a well-known villain in the Batman series. But is she a villain? Let's get into that. First, we're going to talk about her origin stories, then we're going to talk about her abilities and her powers, and finally, we're going to talk about some good deeds that she's done. Her origin story starts in 1966, created by Robert Kanigher and artist Sheldon Madloff. According to the DC Universe website, her first and original origin story started out with Mark Legrand. Mark Legrand was her professor who convinced her to steal an ancient herb from Egypt. After they had successfully done this mission, he actually attempted to kill her with poison, and ultimately she actually became immune to the poison. The second source, which is DC Comics, actually names him as her fiance, so that kind of makes it worse. Her second origin story begins in 1985. She was a botanist who worked with Dr. Jason Woodrow, and he actually seduced her and then used her as an experiment and injected her with multiple poisons and toxins, and she actually almost died twice from it, according to our third source, which is Comic Finds. And she spent 6 months in the hospital recovering from one of his experiments. After those 6 months, she actually discovered that she could control plants and she could also control their toxins. She also believed that she was the mother to the planet Earth. She did not think of herself as Mother Nature, but more as a prophet for Mother Nature, or a servant to her. Her third and final origin has been mostly recently updated in 2011. In a very controversial turn, DC Comics changed her backstory to her being a child to a very wealthy family. Her father actually beat her mother very regularly and ended up killing her and burying her in Pamela's garden. This not only introduced Poison Ivy to the cruelty of humanity, but it also let her turn to her garden, to her plants, because that's where her mother was. Eventually, she used her knowledge of poisons and plants to kill her father by an untraceable poison that she ingested and killed him by kissing him. She then went on to work for Wayne Enterprises, the very Bruce Wayne that is the alter ego to Batman, and she spilled chemicals on herself to become Poison Ivy. She went to Bruce Wayne to tell him about her experiments with the pheromones, and Bruce fired her on the spot, telling her that it is equivalent to brainwashing. This, of course, led her to believe that men are evil and they didn't really like her experiments. Her powers from all of those situations are relatively the same. They all have resistance to poisons and toxins, and her touch can be toxic. So she can actually control how much poison is in her bloodstream. The more poison is in her bloodstream, the more green hue that she has. The less poison, the more likely she is to be able to touch people. She also has the ability to control pheromones, which attribute to the brainwashing that Bruce was talking about, so that she can control others. Chlorokinesis is her most famous ability, which is the ability to control plants with her mind. Often in the comics and the movies, you see her with vines attaching themselves to people, wrapping them up. She also has barbed whipping vines. She has poisoned darts, and lots of other poisons that she uses. Sometimes you'll actually see her carrying her crossbow. Now on to her good deeds. Her first good deed comes in 1997, where she moves to a tropical island in the Caribbean. Again, referencing the third source, which is Comic Finds, she told every Batman that the only reason that she even became a criminal was so that she could have the funds to live away from humanity and just let her ability grow. This island that she came upon was the perfect location because it was run down. It wasn't very good. It was on the verge of just being a wasteland. She actually used her powers and her abilities to not only make the island thrive, but make it livable. The residents there thought that she was a goddess until Russian mercenaries came and firebombed her island and her residents. Now, she did go and take revenge on those Russian mercenaries, which actually ended up being good for humanity. Her second good deed comes in 1999 when Gotham City is hit by an earthquake. And again, she uses her powers and her abilities to restore the park in Gotham City. She is actually known to have adopted 16 orphans that came from the earthquake and helped them live in the park. And finally, she did join the Birds of Prey, which is a crime-fighting ring that involves herself, Black Canary, and others. So she essentially just wants to make the Earth reborn and make it thrive using her powers. So first, Ivy has multiple origin stories, and they are all extremely tragic. Second, her powers are extremely complex, and they can be used for just about anything. And finally, Ivy is not evil. She just wants to do good. She just doesn't always do it in the best way. But now that you know her backstory and you know some of her goals, tell me, is she really a villain?